Hey guys, today we're going to be working on coloring a photo, restoring it. We're going to be taking a damaged, uh, preferably glass negative print, and be working on restoring some of the damages and giving it some colors, kind of like just a little touch to it, I guess. Um, Here's an example of how it was done before we could kind of take things digitally and we had color photography. As an example of a photochrome. Um, in the 1800s, it was kind of a lithography um, way of uh, getting a photo. It's almost like kind of like screen printing in a way, using different photosensitive material to expose different areas with different colors. But today we're going to be taking something and making it look a little bit more natural. You can kind of see how photochrome, um, the grasses kind of have all one color, the sky has one color, it looks like the clouds are painted in, um, whereas the clouds, this area might have been overexposed and they airbrush something in the background. All the bricks are one color, the shingles are one color. So we're going to be getting to this today. We're going to be using a bunch of different new tools today. We're going to be using Content Aware Fill, Content Aware Move, Patch Tool, and similar things to get rid of that area right here and get it to look something more like this. So this is going to be kind of an example of something that you have to pick out, and I'll go into that later. But this is, again, an example of something we'd like to get to. This almost looks like it's taken on a Kodak photo, but another example of kind of a naturalistic look of recoloring some photos. This is a great example of recoloring a photo. I think this was done in the 1800s, but you can see that they probably airbrushed something kind of below in a similar way that we're going to be doing. So with that being said, we're going to get into it right now. So I have a few different examples of images that we can work on today. I am pretty partial to this one, so I'm going to open this one up with Photoshop, and we're going to open it with, or drag it to the icon. I don't want you placing it on an artboard, and we'll go into why that is in a second. But also, let's see here. I'm going to open up a couple of the others just to give an example of some things that you might have to tackle. All right, so for this first one, let's just get right into it. For the first one here, I want to only get her in this. I kind of like how it looks a little artistic with, the edges here. You can see the hands are kind of holding up the sheet right here. But we're going to crop those things out first. Now, we're not going to size the image or anything like that. For this project, we're going to be making an 8 by 10 print. But for this right now, all we're going to do is change our crop ratio to 8 by 10 and just crop down the area here. So it's really nice. It has things split into thirds. That'll be about right. All right. So we're good on the cropping. So now we have it at the ratio that we want it. Now we have to resize it. So we could tell it's 3,000 pixels, it looks like, by around 3,600, 3,700. So that's pretty good if you divide that by 300 pixels per inch, or 300 dots per inch for printing. Remember when we talked about that a little bit, 72 DPI for screens, or pixels per inch for screens, 300 DPI for print. So you can think about that as being maybe 10 inches here and a little bit under here. So to resize an image, we're going to go, since we want to talk about the image, we're going to go to the Image tab up here. We're going to go to Image Size. We're not going to go to Canvas Size because the canvas size ignores the image size. So let's change this. Let's go to inches right here. Let's make it an inch. All right. So you see how the image is clipped, and we cannot get that image back. If we size an image, let's make this, well, you'll see. But if you size an image, you still have the full image to work with. Still have the full image to work with, and it kind of doesn't take the canvas into effect or the artboard into effect. But it still sizes it. You'll see what I mean. It's a little tricky to explain. Okay, so first thing we want to do is adjust the resolution. So right now it's at 1200 pixels per inch. Remember, the highest that we're going to go is 300, and we can even get away with 240 for print. But it looks like whoever scanned this in scanned it in at a resolution of 1200, probably to make a small photo negative, which is typically like about 1.5 inches by an inch. You probably wanted to blow that up a bit so you can see that grain here. That's usually an artifact from blowing images up. So we're going to boost that down to 300. Now you see how things change right here. We don't want these numbers to change because we just went from 3000 pixels to 700, and 700 is like 2 inches, and we want to keep that at 8 inches. So why that does that is it resamples the image down to fit that resizing you did with the resolution. So think about it like I'm at 1200, and if I go down to 300, it's like dividing that number by 4. So it makes that image smaller by 4. So it resamples it down. So now, if I unclick that, and I bring that down to 300, now you can see perfect. I got almost 10 inches there and a height of almost 12. So we're good on that. Now we can click resample because now we want to change those widths. I'm going to do 8, and I'm just going to make it 10 because it's a little annoying to have that. I can click off of that. Oops. Do that one more time. First, let's click off that again. Let's just do that one more time. Click off of resample. Size it to 300 so it doesn't divide those pixels up. Now we can resample. Now it's 8 by 10. All right. Sound good? So we've resized the image. I'll just change my units here, just so we can tell here. 8 by 10. Perfect. And now we want to address all those little imperfections that are kind of a result of the photo process and the kind of archiving process of dust over time. Sometimes you may even scan stuff in the future. And this was part of my job for a couple summers, and the dust can just come out of nowhere and be really, really annoying. So fortunately, it's pretty easy to go in and switch up. So first thing we're going to want to address, now I have, let's make sure my workspace is to where you guys are going to be at. All right, there we go. So the first thing that we're going to be doing here is unlocking our background and just calling that, let's say, image. All right, so this will be our reference. This is our original image. We haven't done anything to this at all. It's still perfectly normal. All right, now just out of preference, I'm going to add a new fill layer, which will be white. I'm just going to call it white reference. All right, so that will just be kind of our background. I just prefer it to a transparent background. No particular reason. So now we have our original photo here. And we want to try to be as, well, typically we want to be as non-destructive as possible. So we usually don't want to work with the image itself. Remember how I said instead of, erasing something in a photo that you don't like, I'm holding down that bracket. Instead of erasing something that you don't like to create a mask, and paint it out that way. Because then you can get rid of the mask when you don't like it, and you still have the original to work from. In this, there's several tools that make it really, really more intuitive to be editing photos, and you'll kind of see why. So the way that you might get taught at an internship, be working on destructive, maybe you get someone that's been in the industry a little bit longer, they would want their photos maybe edited like this. So you would take the stamp tool, you turn it to about 50% opacity. You'll see why in a second. And then you would select a source, and you would kind of paint in. So right now nothing's painting, and that's because I have my current layer selected as that sample. So when I hold down that Alt key, you see how I have like a little eyedropper? That's the area that it's going to select to copy as a brush. So all right, I have that, and it's like current and below. I have my Alt brush. Now I can kind of just paint in. Now I'm using that defined area as a brush, and it kind of stays in relative position to where you're going. So you can see that little crosshair up there. All right. So I would just keep on using that Alt key, and I would go selecting. I do it with a 50% opacity so I can kind of paint it in and it looks a little bit more natural. If I did it at 100%, you can see how it starts to look a little bit more forced. You can get away with it in some areas, but in others, not so much. Now, the things I don't like about this is you can see how even just the little bit that we did right here in particular, the grain is a little bit softer than it is up here, and that can be pretty noticeable when you start to do that a lot. Maybe not at this level. This is a zoomed out level. Maybe if you're looking at it on a wall, this would be like if you're looking at it up close. So I'm holding down that Control 1 or Command 1, and that'll give me the actual size of the print. So maybe that's a little bit big. See that inch is about 2 inches. Maybe I'll back that up 1. That's still not about it. Sometimes I hold a ruler up to the screen, which is kind of what I'm doing right now. That's about right. So again, you wouldn't be able to really see it, but I feel like in a lot of cases, you're going to be able to tell after a while of doing this. Especially instances like this, they start to get a little bit more tricky. And then you start to get in areas where you really got to go in small. And you really got to focus. This can be quite time consuming and a little annoying, in my opinion. So since we're living in the future here, I'm just going to leave that. I'm going to call that stamp example. But see, it's really helpful because if something were to go wrong or we could do it better, I can always turn it off, and I had the original image sized just how I wanted to. So, but in my case, what I like to do is have that original image, don't do anything with it. Now grab it, pull it up to the top. And I'm just going to call that portrait. I call these, group these up, call them example. All right, and now I'm going to start using some destructive tools. So the first one I'm going to be using is the healing brush. Healing brush is really great, and it kind of simplifies everything that we were doing just 2 seconds ago. So let's do the spot healing brush actually. So this is great for if you're editing pimples or things like that. What you do is basically just find a point, click it, and you're good to go. Again, be mindful that you're going to, the more you do it, the more it's kind of going to disrupt that natural gradient or that natural grain that you had going. And that's what you want to match as much as possible so it looks natural to the photo. The more you do that, it's going to be like, oh, they definitely got rid of a bunch of stuff on this one. So kind of keep in mind. You can change the type and proximity, content aware, and create texture. Create texture usually has some good results for me, especially with these grainy photos. It kind of is a little bit more rough, and that's what we kind of like for this. Let me go back over some of those areas. Now there's a ton of these things, so I already tried one video out for you guys, and it was too long to kind of digest. So I am just going to do quick examples of this. So because I'm not the best video editor to do a time lapse. So you can see how this is going to get rid of the bulk of things. In some areas here, that's nice. And two, it leaves it to the computer to decide what's the best way to make up a texture that looks similar. You don't have to spot an area with that stamp tool and say, oh, okay, I gotta find where's that perfect area that I can mimic to get that texture just right. Kind of makes things up, and it's a little bit more believable too when some imperfections happen. It almost looks like a photo, like the imperfections of like the photo, but not these blemishes. So kind of seeing how I'm doing that. All right, so keep going. Now there's going to be some areas where it comes up on the edge of her, of like the edge of her, see her hair and this, like the hair in the background. And now it's not going to be able to do a great job. You see how that looks like, it looks like you're starting to paint something right there, that area. For this, we want something that can basically, is more like that stamp tool, but at the same time lets the computer take control of that grain and makes it look more natural. So we are going to go back into this tool here, click and hold, go to the patch tool, make a selection, then drag it over the area we want it to look like. And there we go. So it's blurry right now, so we have to go up here and change some things. But it starts, you can see how the color and the value is a little bit more of what we want. For this, I had content aware selected. And now content aware or anything will create new pixels. It's not like a blending or like that spot healing that I was doing. It creates new ones. So that's really helpful when you're maybe making an image a little bit larger. And we'll do that when we go into the social media portion of this. But just for now, in most of your cases, you're going to be going into normal. See how that handles it really nicely? So you can see that, all these tools pretty much do the same thing, but they do them in a little bit of a different way each time. That makes things just a little bit better. So for this one, it's a bunch of hair. Luckily, the pattern isn't too strong, so we can kind of get away with doing something like that. Let's see here. I'm going to this area. Now, here's a good example. It's not very noticeable, so I'm going to zoom in before that pixel grid comes in. Now I'm going to drag this over here, and I would think, okay, good, I copied it. But you see that little pixel right there? Right there? You can start to tell that you're copying one and placing it here. So try to avoid those and be mindful of those cases. You don't want to ever make it look like you're copying something from one area to the other. So you have to be mindful to, you know, in some cases take a step back and be like, oh, am I creating any patterns? No, okay, good. For example, if I was to, right, you see how there's this diagonal right here? If I was to grab these and I was like, okay, I'll just do, let's see, this. I'll just do this quick. You'd be able to kind of tell, oh, he just kind of grabbed it right there. I can see that pattern. And it kind of takes away from that illusion. So that kind of brings me to these bigger areas right here. Now, what you never want to do, unless you're in a hurry and you feel like a pro, you never want to grab these and just go to the next one. I know that looks the same. Again, we have that pattern right here. But don't cheat and, you know, get the quick way out, because your results are gonna it's gonna be noticeable. So for this, you can just try to get as small of a selection as possible, so the computer only has to work to replace as few pixels as possible. So that's pretty good. A little bit of a pattern starting, but not really unless you're looking hard. Now another way, so you can see that there's some bigger scratching here. So what I'm going to want to do is grab all those. And I have a square selection right here. I just use the marquee tool. I'm going to press fill. And now you might have foreground color come up. We're going to switch over to content aware. So remember when I said this creates new pixels? It's kind of the same thing, but it works a little bit better here than it does in that patch tool. So this will take kind of a proximity and say, okay, I know what's going on here, I know what's going on here. I can kind of figure out what's going to be going on in here. So it kind of adapts the color and certain other elements to create what it would think is going to be the background. So think if you got rid of the clouds in the sky, it would be able to you know, get the blue back into the sky pretty well. All right, so that's pretty good, but now we can see it's kind of muddy, which is expected, but it got rid of that pretty nicely. Again, the thing that makes this picture pretty tough to work with is that grain, and trying to match that grain as much as possible. So for now, I'm just going to reach over, and it looks like just grabbing that patch tool worked a little bit better for me. It's all about kind of doing one, okay, it didn't really work, going back, and making sure to take the time. So for me, I really like doing all of this restoration work. You can see I got a little bit of a pattern there going. All right, that's pretty good. Now here's a great example of a moment to use that content-aware fill. Got my selection. Content-aware fill. All right, so that was pretty good. Do a little selection right there. Content-aware fill. It's a little muddy, so what I'd like to do is do that content-aware fill, then go in, because it, instead of blending from white to gray, it's doing gray to gray, so it's easier for those pixels to blend into each other. Kind of a pro tip. All right, that looks pretty good. All right, now let's get Now with this big line here, we're just going to take it step by step. Don't try to do the whole thing all at once, because you see how this area has a different tone than this area, than this area. Kind of take one little step at a time here. See, there's that pixel. You can use that marquee tool too, if it's like a really normal line right here. It looks like if I come down with it, it would be pretty similar. Now I have that pattern creating here, so we gotta kind of be mindful of that. Right. It's looking pretty good here. Go in here. I'm just going to do this last line, and we're going to start coloring up here. Get line by line, little section by section here. It's easier for it to go into that shadow here. All right. It's kind of, I don't know, is it ASMR in a way? It feels good. Get rid of these little blotches. Kind of see that wasn't the best right there. All right. So I'm going to use that spot brush tool and see how much it can kind of handle here. Some of the bigger ones. Let's see here. Oh, it looks all right. It could be a little bit better. Right. Just work a little bit more on the hair here. Smaller the better. All right. I told you I do like doing this. All right. So those are some examples of those tools. Now, here's going to be another example of sometimes you have an area where the photo doesn't exist. So there's two ways that you could kind of tackle this if you want to keep that texture or that kind of border going right there. You could have your image be able to be edited. You might have to, let's see here, it might be like that, and then if you want to edit it, you might have to rasterize it. That'll make the image editable. Now maybe you can copy it. Now I have a new layer where it's pasted in front. And I'm going to click on that, press Command T to transform. I'm going to flip it horizontally. I'm going to place it right here. Then what we want to do, we want to make a copy just in case we want to keep the edits the same, then merge these layers together. So now we can use that content aware fill and start getting a little bit closer. So you see how there's some areas where it's not perfect. We can use the patch tool here. Oops. Can I get a bit closer? Let's try. Now, here's a good example. something that you might run into. Um, now, if you come up to a line, there's kind of a darker area and a lighter area, and then you kind of bring it down. It blends things together. If you try to get it right to the edge, this will happen. See how that doesn't really blend as well? It has a hard time blending colors of very different contrast or very different values. So always try to grab a little bit of the border. I think that'll make more sense if you kind of come to that area. But you see how if I wanted to go patch that in, then you would think, oh, just grab it. Kind of looks a little blurry right there. You're going to want to grab that, then grab that border. That'll make the lines a lot more crisper. A lot more crisp. All right, so same thing here. Get pretty close. It's not gonna be perfect. Make sure we have those lines. Just a little bit of the line in, so it's easier for those contrasting values to blend together. These are some kind of tricky areas. I'll try to work a little bit. In cases like this is where the patch tool kind of helps, because you can kind of paint, with the surrounding pixels. Maybe a little bit more softer. You kind of create new pixels. You see how that's pretty good. See, that area is still a little bit contrast. The colors aren't perfect, so that looks a little bit better. All right, that's pretty good. Now we could go into that top area, keep dragging it over. Kind of feel it out. You can go into editing. So that's how you can keep that. And then again, we don't want that dot to stay there because it'd be a little obvious. All right. So that's an example of keeping the colors there. Now in another example, you might have a photo that has a sepia filter over it. So before we start editing this, if we want to color this later, you're going to need to get it to be black and white. So an important thing that you would do after you make all your adjustments here. So let's just do a couple. Just some. See how it's easier when, the grain isn't as obvious. Right, trying to match those colors as much as possible. And yeah, so when I'm grabbing those and kind of moving it to another area, if I grab it to like an area that's not the same value, it will do a pretty good job, but it does its best work when it's closest value, when you're picking from the closest value. Okay. Let's see how, if I want to get rid of that, get pretty close. What I would typically do Just grab a little bit of that white hair in there, and that'll blend things a little bit better. All right. So that was a pretty simple, some pretty simple edits. But then what I would do is go up to, now we're not going to change the color mode to black and white or grayscale because that will not allow us to paint. So we're going to go into that black and white filter here. And then we're just going to leave this. And now I would just adjust the yellows. All these other colors, they may not look like they're doing anything, but if you're scanning, sometimes you may have some artifacts or some compression that kind of looks like these colors. So I maybe boost the yellows and then call it a day. Boost the yellows, maybe bring the reds down. Looks good. Then I go back into my levels here. Then I maybe bring, so this is a histogram. This shows you how the photo is leveled or the amount of values of certain colors. So if you look at right here, it looks like there's no pure dark blacks. It only looks like there's some lighter grays. And you can see that's pretty true. I'm going to grab my eyedropper tool right here. I'm going to select, I'm going to merge all these together just so you can see an example. But see that color I'm selecting right there? Looks like it's not pretty close to black. So we're going to go back. I'm going to go back to my levels here and then make sure that where this is, I want that to be the dark point. Where this is, I want this to be the purest white. Not too much because you don't want to blow out the image, then you won't be able to paint in. Right, then this is your midtones. So if you bring up your midtones, they'll get darker. You get kind of a cool, more of an artistic effect. But if you just kind of keep them in the middle, just maybe bring them up a little bit if you want a little bit more contrast. Then you can get some nice contrast in there. Maybe at the end of the day too, you shouldn't really need this, but you can boost up your brightness and then your contrast here. With this one, it's a little annoying. You see that thumbprint over it. You could go in and make sure that. Let's see here. I'm going to be mindful. Make sure you get it. Then on this one, you would have to really go in. If you really wanted to do it. Or you could always paint on top of it. Oh, that's another option. By that I mean using your eyedropper and just painting with a brush. It's not the best alternative, but sometimes it's a little bit easier and will save you some time. The reason why this isn't a good alternative is because you don't get that grain in. We're lucky with this is that this image doesn't have too much grain. You see what I mean? You really have to layer that up. And a place where, this is Susan B. Anthony on the right. She kind of looks like a villain from a Scooby-Doo movie or something like that right now, but her eyes must have gone in a different direction with the long exposure. All right. So that would be a way that you got to get to it. So you got to get it black and you got to have some contrast. So I'm going to do a little bit more spy healing just for myself. Using that bracket tool to make my brush a little bit bigger. Just quick examples, that would take me a bit. All right, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to do the same thing. Looks like this photo is black and white, and that is because a lot of the colored options here like selective color, making an image black and white, adding adjustments, things like that, are not there. So you can see, oh, it is grayscale. We're going to just turn that to RGB. Don't merge the layers. Changing modes can affect the appearance of layers. That's fine. Don't merge them. Keep them all the same. If they merge them together, you wouldn't have those layers retained that you worked hard to get to. All right. So it looks like there's some drop off here. So I'm just going to bring it a little bit closer to where we want. Bring the yellows down a bit. Now the midtones is where a lot of stuff is happening in this photo because it was nicely exposed. So make sure to always kind of use your eyedropper, just like that. I just kind of use your eyes to see that's a pure dark shadow. That'll be good. All right. Nice. Now some other things that we could do before we get going on this. So we could make a selection of her. So if we didn't want that background, or we want to kind of smoothen it out. So I use that subject selection. I'm on that refine tool right now. Let's go to overlay. Looks like it's having a hard time because it's more of a gray image. Okay, that'll be okay. I know it's not the best. You'll see kind of why. I'm not going to mask her. I'm just going to create a new layer. Then I'm going to mask that layer. I'm going to flip it. I'm going to invert that mask layer. I'm just going to use my paint bucket tool and just add some white. Oops. Add some white to the layer. Then from that, I'm just going to soften it up. So that's a way to just, add some lightness to the photo. I could also do a copy of that. Then blur the background a little bit. See how I kind of blurred that? For this, again, I don't think it's necessary. For something like, let's go to an example of what I did yesterday. For something like this photo, it was quite needed. So the background just needed to be blurred a little bit so it would look like the original portrait that it was in. I kind of blurred things up. So I did my edits, then I blurred. Then I made my adjustments. And I had some color and some global adjustments. So that's where we'll start. So okay, we're good with this. We're going to group this, call this our portrait. So just group all the adjustments that you've made. I'm going to get rid of that blur. I'm going to make it, well, I kind of like it a little bit. I'm just going to blur it just a little bit. All right. And now I'm going to start adding the color on top of our portrait group. So it's all the stuff that you use to kind of, maybe you had some levels here. I'm going to give mine a little bit of a brightness and contrast. All right. Now I'm going to start adding the color on here. So I know we worked a little non-destructively, or a little destructively, with working right on the photo instead of making changes on top of the photo. But for color, we want to keep it non-destructive because we'll be able to go back and edit things. You know, if I give an edit like, oh, the color of their skin could be a little bit darker, or try more of a natural tone for their skin color, you can go in and change it in 1 second. So what we would do for that is we're going to go right on. We're going to select that portrait group here. And we're going to go layer, and we're going to make a new fill layer. It's going to be a solid color. And for this right now, let's do her hair, and let's have it be brown. All right, so that'll be pretty good. So right now we want to get rid of that and kind of paint in the color. So we're going to invert the mask and get a brush here. And then since it's black, remember, that means it's all see-through. Then you paint the white, makes it that layer seeable. All right. So we're going to start painting that color in. And now if you have like a brush with an opacity on it, you might be seeing that it's like, oh, well, this is good to go right here. No, it doesn't need to be blended or anything. That will change. If I keep adding more layers of color in, it will still need to be blended in. So what you're going to need to do is go to soft light. Soft light works. I like soft light. And you can see that color just starts to really look natural. Isn't that kind of cool? You need to be a little bit careful because, you know, if you go off on her face or anything, especially, you know, I'm kind of going a little bit quick here, so I'm going over that her, I don't know what it's called, her bow. But you can see anywhere that you paint that has a little bit of gray, it has information to soak up that color. If it doesn't have any gray, see how this is pure white over here? Nothing really happens. All right, so I'm just going to keep on painting in that color. Painting in that color. Using my brackets to move on color. I have a brush that is a little more of an oval. I find sometimes it helps me a little bit. You can do that by adjusting here and changing the hardness. Using that space bar to navigate quickly here. She's got some frayed hair. See, now this area of the image is a little bit more grayscale, so it's soaking up some color. So we're just going to kind of leave that. All right. That's starting to look pretty nice. And the larger you make the brush, the softer it will be. Now, I'd like you guys to remember that, you know, since the image is soft, don't make your brush very hard. Now, remember too, when you're painting these colors, hair and skin and everything else, it has hundreds and hundreds of little colors in it. When you go to take a photo, let's see if I were to exit out this photo, good way to see color. Let's go PNG. Let's go GIF. You could see, well, all the different colors that make up this image, and right now it's just pretty much black and white. See all those different values? Same kind of thing for skin tones. So think of, okay, I have maybe one color of a darker kind of undertone. Same kind of thing if you were drawing in class. In what's it called? Drawing 1. you're drawing in drawing one, you see how you kind of like build some layers up of color, and it starts to look a little bit more natural. You get a little softer around the hairline here. Maybe I add a darker tone, or this, you know, I should add some like something gold. They kind of make it pop. And take away a lot of it. But you see now how that hair starts to feel a little bit more real. It wouldn't be in the shadows, it would just kind of be a highlight, the sun hitting it. Get rid of that area. Alright, so that's the first kind of color here. Maybe I give it some, since the brown is probably the same. Well, I think a violin might be a little bit more red, so I'm just going to copy a layer here. I'm going to press Command A when I'm selected on my mask, delete, and then invert that again. This is a quick way to work. Okay, now I got a little bit more of a red color. Looks a little bit more like a violin. All right. Flip my colors here. Yeah, see, that looks a little bit, looks nice. Now even paint in those shadows because that color will come through a bit. Nice. Right, cool. Now if I were to go do the whole thing, I would of course zoom in and make sure I'm getting very specific on these. Let me give a highlight. Yeah, I want to delete that whole layer, invert it again. You can, you know, go back up and do new layer and then get a new color that way, but I kind of like to just hold down my Alt key, duplicate the layer, invert it, and then I'm good to go. So here's my highlights. Turn that up a bit. Yeah, that's starting to bring out some life. All right. Don't forget to keep on naming these too. So I'm going to call it hair 1. Copy that. Hair 2. Hair 3. Violin. No, it's a fiddle. Let's be real here. 1. All right.
Actually, no, it's not a fiddle. Fiddle was primarily used in the 1890s, and this photo is clearly from the 1910s.
All right, let's try to get a skin color here. Might be a little bit darker than you would think. Just the way that these colors kind of blend. You're going to see that doing kind of a darker color almost looks more natural. Now it looks like she has jaundice. All right. Paint that color in there. Make it a little bit bigger. And now I would have a different color for, you know, her forehead, for her eyes, maybe her irises, then I would have a different color. For you know, her lips and things like that too, I would make sure her eyebrows are painted in. Let's go do that. All right, gotta select my mask to paint. Right. Then I would maybe. All right, let's make this a bit darker, more of like a red. Again, I'm gonna select A, delete. It's a little much, but make it a little bit more. That looks like she has lipstick on. A little bit more. It's pretty good. Maybe not as soft because, you know, your lips aren't soft. Still looks a little bit bright, but let's see. Darker colors tend to look a little bit more natural. All right, then I would go in and make sure that I'm not painting in your eyes. All right. So you see how it's starting to come together? It could be a little bit better, but and then, you know, too, what will make a big impression is the color of her dress. Let's just say it's blue. You kind of have to make up stuff sometimes. You know, out of, you know, maybe, actually I kind of like the idea of it being more of like a softer green. Right, select our layer to paint in it. White brush here. All right. Now, since it's kind of opaque and it's harsher, you can tell the areas where colors are blending on top of each other. You kind of think about how the light starts to excite those different levels. You know, if you have like highlights might have a little bit more yellow, shadows might have a little more blue. So if you really want to go in with those colors and make it look really nice, that'd be nice. Trick. All right. Let's do some quick coloring here. You see how it's starting to really come together. So things that I might do on top maybe would be add, you know, it's all about like building up those colors of building up those layers. This is only, you know, a small portion of what professionals would do. Maybe on top, if you would add top of everything, you know, you can group all your colors together. Like coloring. Add some global adjustments. Good thing might do would be to go to your gradient tool, basics, select a color here, that new layer. Just kind of blend some color in. And that starts to really, make it look like something. I give it really, give it some life. What I did right there was make sure my basics were selected. Go up there for your gradient. And changed my primary color. Then I went in. Maybe I add the shadows, make the shadows a little bit more blue. Let's go right here. Go to overlay. Not that blue, just enough. Give it something. And now the more layers of color and the more layers of color that you add, it's going to start to look more and more natural. Even adding color to that background too, so it's not black and white. Maybe adding some, let's see, tone this down a little bit. But adding some of that pink to the background be a good way for that sheet to get some life as well. All right. So those are some ways to give a photo some life. Let's kind of see how far. Let's see where we came from. Looks like a natural photo. It looks pretty good for where we're at right now. About an hour in. Let's see where we came from. So I'll group everything up. Just like colored. And get rid of that white reference here. Larry didn't really use it. Make sure all those are highlighted. Where we were, this is where we're at. So that's pretty cool. Get rid of that. And some of those colors are a little bit intense. But pretty cool stuff. Pretty cool stuff. And then for this, you would go up and save as a Photoshop document. Back to yours. All right, I would name mine 2020 03 30 no restoration. Now for this, I'm going to just have you guys submit a JPEG. Save as a JPEG. But in a normal case, if you're archiving work, some of you might come across TIFF files. So TIFF files are uncompressed images. They're kind of what you see is what you get. When you shoot a raw photo on a DSLR camera, or one of those bigger cameras that you see, that's kind of like what the sensor picks up, every little color and everything. That's going to be significantly larger than a JPEG file. JPEG file compresses images. If I were to kind of where you see it a lot is a compressed like memes or things like that. You see it's like really pixelated or has like a vignette around it. Someone screenshotted it, saved it. Someone screenshotted the screenshot, saved it. And each time that you save a JPEG on a new file, it kind of compresses it a little bit. TIFF file doesn't do that. And TIFF file also has a lot more information, but it's a lot bigger. So that's why you don't see it on on like a web image or something like that. So, but what you would want to do if you're saving these images, maybe you're giving this to a family member, or professional work, you would typically give it off as a TIFF and then give them a smaller JPEG for them to access. So a TIFF is just a really great file to always have a backup. When I scan images, I always scan them at a TIFF file format so I can retain all those little colors that I get from these black and white photos. So in order to get your black and white photo, you're going to be going on to Flickr. You can search, I searched, let's see, let's go back to the top here. I searched glass slide, vintage photos, and I came across this album. These are all really great. I'll throw that in the email to you guys. It's a lot of good examples. Another good place to go, again, is that Smithsonian Institute. Right here, I just went to the edge and just searched portraits, these periods, photographs, and then you can go to different collections as well. I had an anthropology selection selected, but it looks like it didn't come up. Let me just go natural portraits, national portraits, update my search. That way I can make sure that I'm not missing anything. You could also search things like women's suffragist movement, or you know, maybe it's Native Americans or Civil War, things like that. A lot of those photos were taken at the time. A lot of photos that were taken during that time would probably be damaged in some way. So that would be a good way to get something that would be pretty cool. This is one of the images that I use, you can see. Also gelatin silver layer, things like that. All right, so yeah, again, make sure that's an 8x10, and we'll be good to go. All right, so best of luck. Signing off.